I think the effort at the European political community will be to try to maintain both publicly and in terms of actual private commitments that support to Ukraine for the moment to try to prevent Russia from breaking through on the front lines, to possibly give Ukraine additional fighting capabilities, because remember, they still hold territory in Russia. So to help them maintain that, but also to maintain the economic and financial support. I also think there's an open question that should be mentioned here. I'm not sure if it'll come up the European political community, but it's definitely coming up around this because it has for months, which is, will Ukraine finally be allowed to use Western supplied long range missiles to hit Russian targets inside, well inside Russia? Now, Ukraine, using its own capabilities, using drones, for example, has wreaked a significant amount of damage on Russian oil refineries, on Russian supply and logistics positions, and on Russian military bases, naval bases, air bases, army positions. But it could do much more if it was allowed to use the British Storm Shadows and the French Scalp long range missiles. Washington has refused to allow that so far, even though Britain has indicated it is willing to give that permission. The question here for the Europeans, whether it's at this meeting today or beyond it, is, do they continue to press the case? Because the question for the Biden administration in its last 2 months is, do they finally lift the ban? Because it's far easier, of course, it's a far better position for Ukraine if it goes into January, having had that permission to strike Ukrainian positions, which puts the onus on Trump to try to reimpose the ban.
And interestingly, President Zelensky has been using the presence of North Korean troops in Kursk and the engagement of them with Ukrainian forces as a reason to say, come on, give me those long range permissions, so that and setting out what he says are the bases where those North Koreans are stationed inside Russia, and that this is a moment that the international community really has to make its mind up, get its finger out, and say something about this. Could this be a turning point?
Well, so let's recognize that in a way this is a PR lever, and you understand it's a PR lever for Zelensky, who is trying to get these commitments on long range missiles on air power to try to shift the balance of the fight in the skies, something that could be instrumental in putting Russia on the defensive. It's a useful lever for him to say, look, this is how far Vladimir Putin is going. He will bring these North Koreans in, recognizing that these troops are from a power which is ostracized by much of the international community, derided by much of the international community, seen as a threat by much of the international community, including because of its nuclear capability. So he's putting that message out to the United States. He's putting it out to the Europeans. He's putting it out to others to say, look, this is why you need to back us. And that is the politics you would expect. But it's also a very real security question here. And it's an inversion of what we were told. The false pretext for Russia to invade Ukraine was that Russia was facing the threat of an invasion from a foreign force, from NATO. And there are a lot of people, whether well-intentioned or otherwise, who parroted that line in the UK, in the US, and other countries. Oh, Russia's fighting a defensive war. Now, here we are in 2024, and no government has authorized forces to fight alongside the Ukrainians. In fact, they've explicitly rejected that. Yet Russia has now taken what we believe to be about 10,000, 11,000 North Korean troops with the prospect of more. So it's actually Russia who has internationalized the front line. So I think that's a pretty good selling point, both in terms of where Ukraine is, but also where Europe is. Because let's realize that in the context of this is not just about Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is someone who carried out a war against another neighbor, Georgia, in 2008. He is something who has carried out cyber war against the Baltic states, notably Estonia, since 2007. He has threatened to carry out war with other NATO members, including Poland, if they don't do the right thing. So it's not just a question of Putin thumping his chest here. He has shown the intention that he will go farther with Ukraine by bringing in foreign forces. Would he go farther if he decided to raise the military stakes with others in Central and Eastern Europe who are members of NATO?
Do you think that the results of the presidential election in the US provides a moment and the necessary and the prospect of Donald Trump being much more vocal about contribution, how much money individual alliance members of NATO spend on their defense, for example. Do you think this is the wake up call that Europe really did need to step up its own security and cooperation and defense spending, but also to step up support for Ukraine so that it can continue the war, irrespective of whether the US provides support?
Europe has been preparing for this moment. I would argue this dark moment, not just because of Ukraine, but because of a range of issues. They've been preparing for it for months. You know, and I know that from EU officials, officials of individual countries who have talked about what's been going on behind the scenes. And it would have been negligent not to prepare for a Trump victory because European officials knew it was possible, if not probable. So no, this isn't a wake up call in terms of, Trump winning. If anything, the wake up call for Europe and the EU as part of that was in February 2022. You know, in that moment when Vladimir Putin launched a full scale military invasion of Ukraine, he put the marker down, which is, will you not only back Ukraine, but will you organize yourselves? And you know what? This is the answer. Putin lost that. He lost that gamble, um, sometimes way too slowly, with a lot of bureaucracy. Those who know the EU know what happens. Europe did rally. Europe did rally in terms of the financial and economic assistance. Europe rallied through NATO, but also through individual countries in stepping up its own defense positioning, whether giving aid to Ukraine or bolstering their own forces. There has been in the past almost 3 years now a sign of Europe finding a place that was necessary and vital and trying to fill it. So, in a sense, Vladimir Putin failed. That's part of the reason why Kyiv still stands today. And let's not forget that. But now we face November 2024, Vladimir Putin's possibly last gamble to try to avoid a stalemate and to try to avoid the frustration of his hopes was Donald Trump back in the White House. That it's not a question of European weakness or of Europe not getting its act together. It's that the US no longer will be able to get its act together because of that very chaotic, unpredictable man who happens to be, in effect, and has been for years, subservient to Vladimir Putin.
That was going to be my next question. How would you judge the relationship and the understanding between the two? Does Donald Trump have any influence over Putin?
Uh, Donald Trump has no influence over Vladimir Putin. Very few people have influence over Vladimir Putin. But in the case of Donald Trump, especially, in addition to being a transactional politician, what can I get out of this? Donald Trump is someone who admires autocrats, and he just does. Whether you want to support him or oppose him, let's just state the fact. He is an admirer of China's Xi Jinping. He has spoken with fondness of how Xi Jinping is president for life, and wouldn't it be great if you could have that in America? He is an admirer of North Korea's Kim Jong Un. He no longer calls him Little Rocket Man. He says he's a man who's done great things for his people. He is an admirer of Viktor Orban, someone whom he had at Mar-a-Lago in Florida during the presidential campaign to show that admiration. And yes, he's an admirer of Vladimir Putin. He has said that publicly since 2015 when he ran for office, and that wasn't because he'd been compromised by the Russians. He genuinely believes that.
President Zelensky's message, though, of congratulations to President-elect Trump was very public, quoting phrases like peace through strength to appeal to Donald Trump. Um, of course, you mentioned earlier that Donald Trump had called him the greatest salesman on earth. If you take into account that this is a president that does diplomacy, does international relations via transaction, everything is a deal to him. What do you think President Zelensky could do to appeal to that, to improve his and his country's position?
President Zelensky's congratulations to Donald Trump, almost as soon as Trump was declared the winner in the United States, was an attempt to use the transactional approach that Trump favors. You know, this is a congratulations of Trump personally, not of the U.S. system, not of the State Department. You did great. You did great. And, Zelensky knows that. Zelensky knows history really, really well. He always refers to history when he goes to each individual country, and he knows their politics well. He studies up on this. But Zelensky's message is not just a message to Trump. This is really important to get across. It's a message to those beyond Trump, especially those in the US Congress and in Trump's potential cabinet. There are certain individuals who Trump may name as Secretary of State or who may name as the Secretary of Defense who have been supportive of Ukraine aid uh, while they've been in Congress or while they've had other government positions. So Zelensky, in a way, is sort of trying to put his hands on the scales of the Trump transition and say, wouldn't it be great if you had this person in, right? It's also a message, of course, to Republicans in Congress, because remember, most Republicans in Congress, despite Trump's threats, despite his bluster, most of them supported aid to Ukraine even during that 6-month blockade. It was Trumpists who were in the minority who continued to block it. So he's trying to get those Republicans in Congress, in the new Congress, to put pressure on Trump to allow the aid to continue, to not cut it off, and even possibly to try to generate the strength for a new aid bill that somehow you sell to Trump as being in his best interest.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Gerbeau. My thanks to our producers today, Louis Sykes and Morgan Burdick, and for you for watching. If you'd like to support us, you can subscribe now, or you can listen to Times Radio for the latest news and in-depth analysis, or go to thetimes.co.uk. For now, though, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.